The first time I smoked your weed was in Fairfax, California. You came out to hear me play at a club there. In between sets, I smoked some of your pot. And it was strong enough that I had to sit down for a second before I resumed performing. And when I started playing, it was different. It was incredibly musical. I just felt focused and inspired and driven. And every other time I've encountered your weed since then, it has been the same thing. And I didn't realize at the time that I was tapping into 50 years of wisdom and practice.
Practice for sure.
And so now I find out that you are this accomplished developer of marijuana and that you have created the most musical strains of pot in human history, according to my opinion. What I don't understand is why the weed that I get from you is so much better at making that possible than all the other weed I've ever smoked in my life, pretty much.
Well, probably because I've been growing it for 50 years, and I made that distinction back when there really was marijuana that you would get directly from indigenous people. That white people did not do marijuana any good. They didn't bring one thing to it outside of being able to grow a shitload of it and apply technology to it that has any good in it. Everything was about like indigenous people in special environments that for millennia almost like have really had this plant in their culture, and they didn't bring any excess baggage to it being what it was. You know, I've got a Cuban mom, and my mom was raised in a family where her mom was a Santeria priestess. And so my mom really inherited a whole bunch of ways of looking at the world about spirit and about energy of things. And my sister's a practitioner of Umbanda. And they have a lot of similarities, and they're really just tied into this deep nature forces that just are the way they are. And it was such a dominant part of things that influenced me that when I smoked marijuana, that's one of the things I realized is like, oh my goodness, all this enculturation, all this learning, all this, being good and holding on to your construct, they just kind of melt away. And that's good. The thing that shaped everything about my relationship with marijuana was a manager in the Suns early on. And he was a friend of Gary Snyder's, and they did things together. And Frank Werber in like 1965. And, he managed the Kingston Trio and the We Five, and really good friends with the Smothers Brothers, and, that amazing scene at the time. So he had this guy named John, no last names here, and John had access to this Acapulco gold. And again, this is 1965. It was every couple of months, bring up a couple of pounds of this marijuana. It was so amazingly strong. It got you so high. And like the really movers and shakers in Hollywood all got this weed because it was the unobtainium of the time. And there was a lot of marijuana that we'd smoked, but nothing was like that. One of the things that was presented to us about marijuana is that the only marijuana that you really wanted to smoke was the marijuana that would keep the LSD high going, because you couldn't really take LSD every day, even though I tried for like half a year. But, the really great marijuana would just put you back in that place, but then you could function in the world, but you wouldn't lose that just deep, interconnected, trust the force thing. How old was I in 1965? God, I had to be like, 19 years old, 20 years old. So having had that experience with Frank, I realized how rare really good marijuana was. I hadn't really considered, growing marijuana. But through a series of events of meeting some pretty amazing people that had access to just really, really high-end marijuana. And again, nobody could get this pot. You could only get a little bit of it, and it was just amazingly expensive. I started saving seeds because I realized that this is the most important part of the plant. This is everything that the plant's about is in these seeds. And it's just my nature to want to save these seeds, so I'm going to put them away and put them away. And so as I would grow marijuana, I'd smoke it. My measure was, I was a musician, did it make me want to play? Or did it make me want to have sex? Either one of those things would indicate that there was that electric molecule, that special thing, was actually in that plant. So that's always been my way of deciding what I was going to grow, mainly musically, auditorially. What was it going to do? And then that's how I'd make decisions about what I'd keep and what I would not grow again. By the time I really started growing it, which was like, 74 or so, when I really started actually having a patch and doing all that, I got some really great advice from Bear. And I was telling him about these seeds that I had and stuff, and he says, well, you keep them frozen, right? I said, frozen? And he says, oh, yeah, you can't keep seeds if they're not frozen. So then I really looked into it and realized that, I didn't have a refrigerator at the coldness that you really needed, but I did have a pretty good freezer. And from that point on, I started freezing all my seeds and wrapping them up, and eventually they created seal-a-meal bags, and so I could suck the air out of them. And then I started putting the gas that you fill wine bottles up to get the oxygen out and putting that in the bags and then sealing them up. And so I've, collected seeds from, I'd say, 1969 till the present. So I've got a huge repository of like all that amazing marijuana that, came all from the indigenous, people around the world.
Did you have a seed library? That was a separate
I did
thing?
have a seed library, but luckily I've always kept identical patches, groups of seeds, one with me and then one with a really good friend up there in Clear Lake, who actually used to be Eric Johnson's manager a long time ago. And so she's been the holder of seeds for, or half of them, because I always needed the backup. I need my seeds so I can work with them and I have access to them, but then I got to have that backup that's all the same stuff that's untouched, buried in the big freezer underneath a whole bunch of frozen stuff to really keep it as cold as it possibly can.
How big a thing is that?
I've got a box about this big, and it's pretty much filled with vacuum bags with seeds.
So a few million seeds in there?
I've got lots of seeds, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of seeds. And then inside that, I have a metal box. And in that metal box is pretty much the Durban poison. I've got a few Panama Reds. I've got like a few different varieties of Michoacan, and all of them from the early 70s, late 60s, early 70s. And then I've got the Durban poison from, I think it was 1981, that was amazing. That it came in banana leaves. And it was all rolled up in there. And then they pressed all these banana leaves together into these blocks. So most of the seeds in it were squashed. A lot of the pot that you'd get was so compressed. Finding a seed that wasn't smashed was a thing unto itself, But that Durban poison was really great. And then I've got a whole variety that I haven't been growing for a while, which is called the Cam. And the Cam is Kona African Michoacan, and it's a blend of those. And the gold cam, I ended up giving Herbie Herbert, bless his soul, an ounce of it. And he split it with Steve Parish. And they took it to Kona. They entered it in the Kona Cup. They listed themselves as the growers, and they won the Kona Cup. But that's what I know about marijuana as far as interacting with people and stuff. You know, it's impossible for anybody, even the most high-minded person, to just let a cutting of the best marijuana they've ever seen go. And it doesn't matter if they tell you if they took a cutting or not. It's probably safe to assume, and you might be wrong, but it's probably safe to assume that they did. So, and really covering your genetics and trying to keep it out of the market is really hard, because I'm in a good place right now where I trust people that if they tell me they don't, they don't. But I've had times where I really have had to show up in the springtime and just force people to pull their plants out and give me whatever seeds they had and, that they'd made, and said, no, that's mine. You can't do that. You said you weren't going to do that, and I shared it with you. And, now I realize that I let you grow this plant, and you're actually letting your friends grow it, and you guys got a plan, and now you're, no.
So you need to control access to your genetics. You need to not let other people germinate your plants. Is that right?
Only people I really trust.
And that's to protect the market value of and the uniqueness of it?
All the above. I mean, I do have to admit that after 50 years of working on this, it probably would leave me a little disturbed for somebody else to go out and make millions of dollars on it,
I understand.
I could probably let go of it, but there'd be some work.
Well,
I'd be screaming in a pillow for a little while.